Hi, I'm Neil Christiansen, author of noir thrillers Dark White and Malcolm Karma Cold Turkey, both available everywhere you buy books. Welcome back to another sporadic episode of Unfortunately, I'm reading House of Leaves, so you don't have to. Today we're covering Chapter 9. Holy shit. This book, this chapter, Chapter 9 is 45 pages long, and before we even get into the chapter proper, if there even is such a thing, in the little heading at the top of the page, we have a footnote. By all accounts, as far as I can tell, this entire chapter is footnotes. Footnotes to footnotes to footnotes. The first footnote, footnote X, is pretty standard and short, and I would say rather inconsequential. It simply references a passage from another book that feels apropos to our story. Here is the toil of that house, and the inexorable wandering. The house difficult of exit, and difficult to enter. However, the second footnote is a footnote in that footnote. It appears on page 107. The footnote it references is not found until page 114. The text is beginning to get difficult to follow. We start with Johnny tracking down a woman named Tatiana. She was one of Zampano's readers and writers, or scribes, and had a list of books that Zampano had requested and that she had read to him. Johnny goes to meet Tatiana in order to acquire this list. However, Johnny finds it very difficult to leave his apartment. He gets anxious, nervous, scared, full of anxiety anytime he tries to even walk to the door. He believes this is because of the documents in Zampano's manuscript, and he acknowledges that his mental state is deteriorating. He says even reaching for the latch made him sick to his stomach. He goes on to document a hallucination he had when he did leave the house, in which he saw himself, or rather experienced himself, being killed by being hit by a truck. It's graphic and disturbing, and I absolutely can imagine what that would be making him feel. Once we get through Johnny's story, we enter a footnote marked K, which doesn't seem to reference anything in the main block of text, although that's a bit of a misnomer since we have not had a primary block of text yet. Everything has been footnotes. So this footnote, K, ends up referencing a block of text 6 pages later. The gist of the footnote seems to be, as we've talked about before, that these liminal spaces in the house, these mysterious unending hallways, are a kind of labyrinth, and that the labyrinth may, in fact, be some sort of prison to either hold something in or keep something out. Then we go into several pages of red text that's all been struck through. Johnny later tells us in another footnote that these were passages that Zampano had blacked out with the Sharpie or some other heavy marker, and that Johnny had recovered it through the use of turpentine and a magnifying glass. The passages don't seem to offer anything particularly useful narratively, although they do start to display something that becomes prevalent throughout the chapter, which is annotated footnotes throughout the text that are not in order. So we jump from footnote number 127, and then the next one is 124, and then the next one is 126. So then, returning to the primary narrative of the chapter, which is a continuation of that footnote marked K from earlier, Zampano is speculating on the purpose of the expansive spaces in the house. There's an interesting but brief moment where Zampano speculates that the random nature of these spaces that seem just jumbled and uninteresting in the moment, perhaps, like a maze or a labyrinth, when you step back from them in space, would have some sort of cohesive pattern to them. Just like if you're in the middle of a labyrinth or a maze on the ground and it just seems twisty and turny, but if you were ever to get in an airplane and look at it from above, you would see an elegant pattern to the labyrinth. He then goes on to discuss how it doesn't really matter because we are unable to do that. We're unable to remove ourselves to a higher dimension to see the elegance of the space. Now, Johnny starts reflecting on the idea that sex or intimacy with women is something that alleviates his panic, his anxiety, and the darkness inside of him. So, again, he goes looking for a chance to hook up with someone in order to make himself feel right. However, most of his regular partners turn out to be unreachable or unavailable, so, as usual, he resorts to calling Lude to go out for drinks. While out with Lude, he sees a woman that he is very interested in. Lude then approaches her, says something that embarrasses Johnny, and Johnny just ends up leaving. This is when he meets another woman, a stranger, and does end up going home with her. But now we're back in exploration number 4. Holloway and his team do finally reach the bottom of the Great Staircase after 3 days of descending it. At the bottom of the staircase, there's an ominous feeling that Jed refers to as the heaviness. They spend the night there at the bottom, and then on the beginning of day 4, make out to explore the space at the bottom of the staircase. However, as they move further and further from the base of the stairs, Holloway begins to become less and less vigilant about marking their path. He starts becoming reckless, moving forward at an increasing pace, which makes Jed question if he even knows what he's doing. Holloway appears to be looking for evidence of some kind of edge. He needs for there to be an outsideness to this space. He's literally breaking down walls and crashing through spaces, trying to find evidence that there is a wall that is the end of the space. That somehow you could get out of this space. But there doesn't seem to be any evidence of this. This is where we see the first evidence of what I would call misplaced text. It's a footnote, but it's boxed in a blue box in the upper right-hand portion of the page. When we turn the page, we find a mirror image on the opposite side. Same blue box, same exact text, but mirrored. The text in this blue box continues on every page for almost the entirety of the rest of the chapter. It's a single continuous footnote, and all it does is list out architectural features that would be present in a home or a room, but are missing from these liminal spaces. It says, not only are there no hot air registers, return air vents, or radiators, any kind of ducts, weather, spiral, lock, steaming, standing, rib design, double-walled duct, or low loss, T, flat, oval, round, you get the point. The list goes on and on and on. We also get another footnote list that shows up on the outside edge of each page for the rest of the chapter. This is a list of architectural styles that are not followed. And again, it's just a list. Back in the main text of Zampano's manuscript, he asked the question if this interior space is part of the Navidson house. It is part of the house. It is within the house. It is the house. Then whose house is it? When the team finally decides to head back to the staircase, they find it much further away than they had remembered or expected. Because of the time they've been gone and how much longer it is taking them to get back, they begin to ration their food. And Zampano tells us that they had also prudently decided to leave provisions along the way while they were coming down the staircase in the first place. But as they move up the staircase, they find that someone, or something, has been destroying their cache of food and water, as well as tearing apart their whole wayfinding system of fishing line and neon markers. Then they begin to hear the growling again. This seems to wake up the hunter in Holloway, and he immediately takes his gun and dashes off into the darkness, trying to find the creature. Jed and Wax follow him, but are seriously concerned about his deteriorating faculties and reason. Finally, Jed puts his foot down and says, "Stop, we need to go back." Holloway is, at this point, completely mad and will not accept this. Holloway begins a torrent of profanity-laden ranting at the two of them, saying that they are mutinous and ruinous, and he is in charge. Finally, Jed ignores this, and he and Wax turn back and go back to the stairway without Holloway. As they continue to climb up the staircase, Jed notices something strange. He notices Velcro straps are now missing from his uniform. Zippers are missing from his pockets. He says it's as if anything he's not actively thinking about just disappears. Eventually, Jed and Wax get to a cache where, while the food is all destroyed and missing, there is a bottle of water. However, as Wax lifts the bottle to drink from it, a gunshot is heard, and Wax is struck in the shoulder with a bullet. He falls and begins bleeding profusely. Jed drops to his knees to try to help and tries to figure out what's going on when Holloway emerges crazy from one of the dark corridors. Holloway is confused as to how he even got there, and he's shocked that he's hit one of his own team members. He seems to come out of his craze for a moment, realizing what's happened. He says he swears he was firing at a monster. Then Jed says he needs Holloway to help him carry Wax back up the stairs. Holloway freaks out at this idea and says that they can't go back now because he can't go to prison. Jed says he's not going to go to prison unless he doesn't help. If you leave him here to die, I'll make sure you go to prison, and they throw away the key. But Holloway isn't hearing it. He is back in his craze, back in his manic mode, and he takes off and runs deep into the darkness of another corridor. So Jed begins to try to carry Wax up himself. But soon after, another gunshot is heard, and the bullet ricochets off the wall next to them. Holloway, as seen by his headlamp, is now on the opposite end of the huge spiral staircase. Jed shuts off all the lights and starts carrying Wax to safety down another corridor to avoid Holloway's gunshots. They hide until Jed thinks it's safe, and he goes out to try to find his way back to the stairs, which he finds is impossible. He is completely lost. Here, we start to see another set of strangely formatted text. One is an upside-down set of footnotes that doesn't seem to have a start. It just seems to begin in the middle of a sentence, and the other is a sideways one on the other page. As we move on, we see that the upside-down text is indeed a footnote. It's just running backwards through the book. It actually starts 3 pages later in the book and reads backwards on the previous pages. We also are starting to see footnotes that move around and reference pages back or pages forward. It's as if the book itself is becoming a maze. It's during these pages that the book again seems to jump forward and tell the future of real life. A footnote in the book makes an argument that the existence of digital manipulation of media is going to deteriorate the public's trust in what they see. I mean, tell me that doesn't hit home. Listen to what it says. In the future, readers of newspapers and magazines will probably view news pictures more as illustrations than as reportage, since they will be well aware that they can no longer distinguish between a genuine image and one that has been manipulated. Even if news photographers and editors resist the temptation of electronic manipulation, as they are likely to do, the credibility of all reproduced images will be diminished by a climate of reduced expectations. In short, photographs will not seem as real as they once did. Here, our boxed out footnote finally ends, but the box remains and grows and grows. Johnny, still looking for peace through intimacy, picks up another random girl outside of a store. They return to his home and, of course, end up having sex. Johnny feels especially intimate and tender with this particular woman. He specifically calls out that he would like her to fall asleep with him. However, after he drifts off and then wakes up, he finds her gone. He then says that a few days later he heard her call into the radio show Loveline with Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla. During her call, she wants to know if she's a bad person for leaving him in the middle of the night. While he was asleep, he started screaming and shrieking and saying terrible, ghastly, violent, bloody things. She said it scared her so much she had to leave. This knowledge that he frightened another person that he only felt tenderness towards really crushes him and brings him deeper into his neurosis. He locks himself in his apartment. It's at this point that he then hallucinates sounds outside his door. Monsters coming. Windows shattering, the ground crumbling beneath him. The editors then reference an email they received after the book had originally been published online. I think Johnny was a little off here. I wanted to write and tell you about it. We actually had a pretty rad time, though his screams were weird and definitely scared me. He was very sweet and really gentle and kind of crude too, but we still had lots of fun. I was sorry to hear he disappeared. Do you know what happened to him? So this is certainly foreshadowing something that comes later in the book. Something happened to Johnny. Apparently he disappears. Finally, we have Jed once again trying desperately to carry Wax home. But as they're navigating the narrow corridors, they hear the growling return. Jed barricades the two of them in a tiny dark room with a door, but the growling gets closer and closer and closer. Soon it's directly outside the door, and something begins banging. This was a brutal fucking chapter. The way the footnotes didn't go in order, the way they bounced between pages, it does make you anxious. It makes you uncomfortable, it makes you frustrated, but it's also making the space seem so much bigger, so much more mysterious. I'm also finding it harder and harder to balance the narrative of Zampano's manuscript with Johnny's stories of what he's going through while putting together this manuscript. And of course, we can already tell that there's something of an unreliable narrator situation going on here, and we don't know who to believe in the first place, which is reflected in the continued discussions about what we can believe in media. I have to say, while this book is incredibly difficult to get through, it's also the masterpiece that everyone claims it to be. And I'm reminding you at this point that while I'm calling this I'm Reading House of Leaves so you don't have to, the fact of the matter is nothing I can present here is akin to reading this book. So if this book is on your punch list, don't use this as an excuse not to read it. I've had this copy for almost 10 years, and this is the first time I've pushed this far into it. This book is an endeavor, and it's not an easy read, but it's mind-boggling the way it makes you feel. Coming soon, soon-ish, Chapter 10.